Why hello there, welcome. My name is Christine and today I'm going to be talking about introversion and all of the cool shit that comes with being an introverted girly. I very much apologize in advance if the lighting of this video varies a lot, but I only have natural daylight and alas, I do not control the weather, which was very upsetting to me personally to discover, but I do not. So I have to just deal with it. If you do not know, I mentioned this in some of my previous videos, but I identify as a relatively introverted person. I'm also quite sensitive. And I think that introversion also comes from being a relatively sensitive person to some extent. I get overstimulated quite easily, which I talked about in a previous video on social media consumption as well, and the expectations to, being constantly available online. But I think in general, being quite sensitive to the world around us, being sensitive to maybe also other people's emotions or feelings. I think just in general, if you're somebody who takes things in really easily, if you have a pretty, how do you say that? Like a porous? Ooh, that doesn't sound like I'm saying it right. Porous. If you have a very thin membrane between kind of yourself and the rest of the world to where you can struggle to keep things out sometimes, I think often that leads to a slightly more introverted personality because it creates kind of this just inherent need to have barriers up a little bit more and to protect yourself a little bit more and not expose yourself to too many stimulating impulses from the world around you constantly all the time. And so that can mean that we withdraw a little bit more from social situations, that we don't seek them out as much because they have just a higher potential to be overstimulating to someone who has, again, a pretty thin membrane between themselves and the rest of the world where things permeate very easily. This is also one of the reasons why I care about keeping up with the news and what goes on in the world around me, but why I also put boundaries on how much I consume news media and how frequently, because I'm not one of those people who can, read something terrible and tragic and then I can just shake it off me again and return to work after my lunch break and have that not bother me or weigh on me. And so if that's something that you can recognize, constantly exposing yourself to that kind of stimulation, constantly exposing yourself to impressions from the world around you can really drain you from energy a lot. Like if you're not someone who can just shake things off after an unpleasant encounter or after you learn something really upsetting or read something really upsetting, if you're someone who, for example, I can't really watch sad movies. I don't watch them. And a lot of people make fun of me for it because basically the only things that I watch are like silly, ridiculous, cute TV shows and movies, and like they're lighthearted and silly, and there's something profound to some of them, but they're not necessarily Oscar-worthy films. And so people sometimes make fun of me for that because I don't ever really watch anything serious. I don't tend to really watch dramas or thrillers, definitely not horror movies. I haven't watched one since I was 16 and I still regret watching it to this day. I think I've seen 2 or 3 in my whole life when I was a teenager. I regret it, with my whole entire heart, because again, things just permeate easily for me. So for that reason, whenever I watch TV or entertainment or anything like that, I don't watch serious movies. I don't, because generally they leave me afterwards feeling upset and with a lot of emotions that I then have to take time to process. And in my everyday life, I don't have that kind of time to process my feelings every day. So I prefer to just watch, reality TV or comedies. That's generally really what I consume, unless I'm, deciding that, okay, I'm setting some time off now to expose myself to something different, to learn about something that might be harsh and unpleasant to confront myself with, but that I think is important that I know. Then generally that is what I do, because I just have to protect myself a little bit more than you do if this is not something you can relate to at all. I have other people in my life who are pretty similar to me in that respect, but I also have people in my life who can't recognize that experience at all, where emotions move through them just a lot faster than they do for me. And so that's not something that they necessarily need to consider in the same sense. It's not necessarily a massive inconvenience to their whole day if they watch a sad movie. I think if you are someone who's a relatively sensitive person, then I think there can also be a higher probability that you're also a bit introverted, because you're sensitive to the impressions of the world around you. You can be sensitive to other people's moods, emotions, mood swings, thoughts, opinions, whatever it might be. And that can be a lot. That can be just a lot of stuff to deal with, which I think is perfectly okay and perfectly fine. And I, for a lot of my life, like I've never really struggled with being introverted, to be honest. Not as such. I've always quite liked it. I have always enjoyed spending a lot of time in my own company, exploring my own inner world, my thoughts and feelings. And I've always been a very creative person as well. And I think that, you know, sensitivity, I think, is something that benefits my creativity as well. So I've always found a lot of peace in spending time alone and in exploring myself and my own interests and, you know, developing my own character, reading books, whatever it might be. I've always so enjoyed that. But I remember when I was a little child, I often had such a difficult time having to disappoint people who maybe wanted to spend time with me. And it wasn't that I didn't want to spend time with them, but I didn't. I actually didn't. It wasn't that I didn't care for them. But, you know, my friends when I was little, I had one friend in particular that I was very close with that, you know, we would spend every day together in school. And I would go to school in the morning and I'd come home in the afternoon. I would have spent my whole day being around other people. And I didn't want to be around people anymore for the rest of that day. That was fine. That was enough. And so I never wanted to do anything with this friend of mine after school. And that wasn't personal. That was just because I needed to be alone. Like I really needed to be alone. And I remember when I was little, I used to really struggle with saying no because I felt bad. I felt bad sometimes that I had people around me who wanted to spend time with me, but I didn't want to spend time with them as much, not because they meant less to me or because I didn't care for them or because I didn't enjoy spending time with them, but because I just wanted to be alone. And when I was a kid, I remember I did not know what introversion was. No one ever really told me. In retrospect, both of my parents are relatively introverted people as well, so it makes sense that I am too. But I just never really got any kind of language or, you know, vocabulary to be able to express that. And so I didn't really know what it was. And so I guess sometimes I thought maybe I was weird, but I also didn't give a shit because honestly, like I just enjoyed being alone and I just didn't. Like I could not be bothered to hang around anyone after school. No, absolutely not. And I think as I got older, I became like a little more social. And I wouldn't say that I'm not a social person, like everyone is. I have people in my life that I absolutely love to spend time with, but it's also because, you know, they're not generally people who take a lot of energy from me. Like they're people that I just feel really great around and I love to spend time with them. And at the same time, I also love to spend time alone. And so that is a balance for me that I always have to respect. Now that I am an adult and I know what introversion is and I have a language for that, to me that has made it so much easier. So, you know, when I was a child, I couldn't just say to my friend, oh, it's not personal, it's just that I'm a relatively introverted person, I just need a lot of time alone. I didn't know how to say that when I was a kid. I just knew that I did not want to spend time with anyone after school. I just wanted to be alone. And that I think could more easily be taken as a personal rejection when I didn't know how to express why that was the case. And so obviously now as an adult, I do. And fortunately, that's something that most people understand, even if they can't relate to it. It's something that most adults, I find, are generally good at respecting. But so my relationship to introversion has mostly always been that I have really enjoyed being an introverted person. I've always thought it was pretty lit. Obviously, there are downsides to it. I would not exactly say that I am a social, charismatic butterfly. And so that is something that I wish I was better at, that maybe I'll get better at with age. And like you can be introverted and still be really great at like making small talk and conversation with other people and things like that. I am just not, it's not a strength of mine. I do wish that it was. I also think that it can probably be harder to make new friendships if you are an introverted person. Not that it has to be, but I think it can be. I know for me, I take a while to really just feel at ease around other people. Like I need time before I can really be myself with them. So like there are drawbacks, but overall I've always really enjoyed spending time with myself, and I've always liked that I can enjoy spending time with myself and that I'm not really dependent on other people most of the time to ghosts? No? Okay. That I'm not really dependent on other people most of the time to fulfill my need for stimulation in some way, shape, or form, that I can do that on my own. I saw a Shan Boodram video the other day where she talked about extroversion versus introversion, and she mentioned this theory, I guess, that I have come across before, but that I kind of forgotten about again, that introversion is caused by a very active and vivid inner life. Often a very active imagination, which definitely has always been the case for me. And so because introverts, their natural state is being quite stimulated, just being in their own head. So that's not something they necessarily need to seek out in other people. And that's the reason why they're not as extroverted, why they don't seek out spending time with other people necessarily as frequently as someone who's very extroverted. Which is something that I think really rings true for me. I've always had a very active inner life. I've always had a very active imagination, which is something I really like about myself, and that brings a lot of joy to my life. And I think that's also the reason that what I seek out in other people usually is not extra stimulation. I seek out the company of people who relax me, who kind of calm my nervous system, that I feel really great around, and they get me out of my own head, and I just feel more grounded with them, and I feel calm and at ease. Those are the people that I really gravitate towards. So I think that is a really cool gift of introversion, and I think that there are many gifts associated with being a more introverted person, obviously with being a more extroverted person too, but I have no experience with that, so that's not something I can tell you about. But the reason that I wanted to sit down and film this video and talk about some of the cool things about being more introverted is that one of the kind of difficulties that I have experienced in my life with being more introverted is that extroversion, I think, is often more glorified. I think my experience at least has been that there is kind of an image of what especially like a healthy young person is supposed to look like and what they're supposed to do and spend their time on. And that image usually is associated with extroversion, with having a very, very active social life, having lots of friends, seeing lots of people, being very, very active in that way. And I have never been. And so I've always kind of felt, I guess, misunderstood a little bit by my surroundings in that sense, or like, I guess felt like I've been seen by the world around me, sometimes particularly by adults, as not well adapted, I guess. So that has always been a little bit of a struggle that I had as an introvert growing up, feeling, kind of misunderstood by the world around me, or feeling like there was a pressure of me to be in a certain way or to act in a certain way that was just kind of contradictory to what I was actually like and what actually made me happy and what worked for me. Obviously, social connection, human connection, it's really, really important for everyone. It's such an important part of human life. It's so fulfilling, and it's something that makes everyone's lives better. But there's nothing wrong with also wanting to and needing to spend a lot of time alone if that works for you and it makes you happy. It's, at the end of the day, an individual balance for everyone. Like, everyone needs alone time and everyone needs time around other people, and it's really just like the level of that's going to be very individual to you. And no one knows what it feels like to be in your body and to be in your head other than you. So other people's opinions at the end of the day don't really matter. But I personally do not see why introversion should be any less healthy than extroversion. And so I feel like in that way, it's a little bit misunderstood, because there is nothing that isn't healthy about being an introverted person. It's just a way of operating. It's completely neutral to me. And there's a lot of good that comes with it. One of those things is a more active imagination and a very active inner life, which often is something that introverted people can recognize or relate to. I think with that, there's also sometimes a creativity that comes along with that. When you spend a lot of time alone and you have a pretty active imagination, often that can really fuel creativity. And so that's also a really cool thing that comes along with being on the slightly more introverted side. It's also kind of cool and kind of nice to not necessarily rely on having people around you every day in order to, feel stimulated. It's nice to be able to do that for yourself. And also, there are so many beautiful and amazing things that we can do with our time really only when we are alone. For example, I'm writing my master's thesis right now, and to do that I have to be alone. I can't be sitting around chit-chatting all day long. My paper will never be finished and it would never be handed in. I also think that being able to be alone and to thrive on your own is also just such a beautiful and really, really important thing. And I think it's so important to nurture the relationship that you have to yourself. Because when we can fulfill a lot of our own needs, we don't need other people to do it quite in the same way. And so that can also make it easier sometimes if there's someone that maybe should not be in your life. It would be easier to accept that if you know that you don't really need them in order to feel enough, in order to feel complete as a person, in order to fill out your time with things that are interesting and stimulating and fun to you. And there's so much shit that you can get done basically on your own time. And there's also opportunity in that too. I think sometimes we think of extroversion as being something that can lead to more opportunity. Extroverted people can be a lot better at networking and making new connections, and that I think can create a lot of serendipity for them as well. That might be more difficult to come across as an introverted person, I think, depending on how you use it. Because there's also so many things that you can only really get done alone when you sit down and you take the time to do them on your own. Artists, I think, often tend to be slightly more extroverted people. There are people who spend a lot of time alone, just basically examining their own internal landscapes, to put down something in writing, to put down something in a canvas, whatever it might be. So I think this idea that there is a particular way that you should feel energized, and that the healthiest way to feel energized is to be extroverted and is to be energized by other people, I don't think that is true. And I think that completely misunderstands introversion, which is also a completely valid way of being and navigating the world. It's just different. And extroverted and introverted people can often just be really good at different things as well. And at the end of the day, I think and believe that we need all kinds of people to make the world go around, or people would not be different. If we needed all of us to be the same, then we would all be the same. Also, I think another benefit of being a more introverted person is that often, because you don't necessarily have the same energy for other people as a more extroverted person does, like you generally feel the most energized by spending time alone, and that's kind of how you charge your batteries. I think one of the advantages of that as well is that you are probably a lot less likely to spend time on toxic people or people who don't want good things for you, because you will respond to that sapping of your energy a lot faster. You don't have the same energy or patience for people who are not necessarily good for you. And if it's not someone who is really, adding to you in some kind of way, if it's not someone who's really making you feel good, that you feel really comfortable with and really safe with, then I know for me personally, then it's taking more energy from me than it's giving. And then inevitably, I will have to end that relationship with that kind of toxic person who is sapping my energy, because I will have no choice. I just won't have the energy for it. It's going to be more effort to me than it's worth. If it's not someone that I really feel good around, if it's not someone I really feel safe with and that I feel like I can be myself with, then it isn't worth it to me. So I think in general, I tend to not spend a lot of time with people who don't have good intentions for me. And I'm also pretty good at sniffing them out very early on. Even when I look back on my teenage years and things like that, when I look back at people that I later had relationships with, like friendships or anything, and when I look back at that and I ask myself honestly, prior to entering this friendship, did I know that this person would not be good for me? The answer deep down is always yes. When I meet someone and this is not someone who's gonna be good for me, usually I can tell pretty right off the bat. I can just feel it. There's just something there's off in the energy and in the vibes. And I can just feel my energy slowly but surely just being sapped out of me. And because I don't have as much energy to give as someone who's more extroverted might, I tend to cut those relationships a lot faster, or to not establish those relationships to begin with. I tend to not develop relationships or friendships with people very often who are not going to be good for me, because I can just feel something being drained from me pretty early on usually. And sometimes I have gotten myself in trouble by ignoring that, because I'm scared of like being judgy. I'm scared of, you know, being insensitive, hurting someone's feeling, judging someone too quickly. And I have learned as I've gotten older that that's something I need to not worry about, because I'm always fucking right. I have never been wrong. I've never one time been wrong. Every time I've met someone and I've been like, something feels off about this energy, this vibe here, it's always just been a matter of time before I figured out why I felt that way. And I have always been right. For me, at least, that is one of the gifts of introversion as well, is because you don't have the same energy for other people. You also have less energy, in particular for people who are not necessarily the best for you. I also know that for me, I tend to have a few really close friendships rather than, you know, a dozen friends who maybe I'm not particularly close with. So I've never had like a lot of friends or a lot of acquaintances. I've always just had like a really, really small group of friends that I've been very close with and that I've had really, really meaningful relationships with. And that tends to be usually how I form friendships. Again, because if something does not have the potential to be a deeper, more meaningful relationship where, you know, we can really get to know each other and I can feel really safe with them and all of that, then it just isn't really worth it to me, because it's taking more energy from me than it's giving to maintain that relationship. So forming meaningful connections, I think, is also really a gift of introversion. Empathy, I think, is also a skill that especially is related to sensitivity, but also, again, something that introverted people can be good at. Again, being in touch with their emotional lives and also understanding and holding space for the feelings of other people, because you are likely to be in touch with your own emotions and your own inner life. You're also likely to be good at connecting with other people, to understanding their emotions and their inner life, and to be able to relate to that and form meaningful connections on the basis of that too. And so I think there's so much good that comes with it. Okay, I want to add a couple of things here, because first of all, obviously this is talking very much about introversion and extroversion in pretty black and white terms, and I want to make clear that it is a spectrum, and you don't have to identify with either of these categories if you don't. There are people who identify as both of these or neither of them. There are people who are really introverted, but they're great and wonderful and really charismatic in social situations. And likewise, there are extroverts who still really need a lot of time alone, but they still identify more with extroversion, or they can still have a lot of the qualities that I think you tend to see a little bit more in introverted people, but they can still have those. So, you know, all of this really is such a spectrum. And I know people who fit more into one category or the other. And I know people who are more difficult to position within any kind of category because they're more so both or neither of these things. So one, just want to establish all of this is a spectrum. I'm just talking about this as someone who has always identified more with one end of the spectrum, which is the slightly more introverted end. And again, no one is 100% extroverted and no one is 100% introverted. So keep that in mind. But also, something I wanted to add here that I think is really important is that a stigma or an idea that I've sometimes been met with as an introverted person, and unfortunately that I think I've internalized a little bit throughout my life, is this idea that because I am introverted, a little bit more introverted, which essentially to me just means that I charge my batteries by being alone. My social battery on average lasts about 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6 hours on a really good day. And I think an unfortunate stigma I've internalized a little bit is that because of that, I'm not good at connecting with or relating to other people or establishing meaningful connections. And I think that's such a shame, because the opposite is actually true. I am someone who I think, like many other introverted people, I think is pretty in touch with my own emotional landscape and my own internal world. And that's such a great point of departure for actually creating really meaningful, strong, lasting connection with other people. That is a great place to start out from. And so I think a lot of introverts can kind of recognize this feeling that, maybe small talk is not really their thing. Maybe that's not really what they're the best at. Or maybe group situations can be really scary and overwhelming. But this thing that you can't create meaningful connections, or that you're worse at that than an introverted person, I just think is so fundamentally untrue, because literally you have such great conditions for being able to create really meaningful relationships and being able to relate to people on a really deep emotional level because you're in touch with your own emotional life. Like that's incredible. That is such a great advantage to have. So I think where I've always seen my introversion little bit as like an obstacle to creating relationships with other people, actually it's a really great opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity for creating relationships with other people. And that was just like a realization that I had while editing this video. And so I really just wanted to throw that in there in case there's anyone out there who's ever felt the same way. I'm sure there is. I'm sure I can't be the only one. So yeah, just like a little perspective to brighten your day, because that honestly kind of really brightened my day. I can't believe that I never really realized that before. But yeah, that's actually great. So if you're introverted, please do not ever believe for a second that you can't establish meaningful connections with other people, because you have so much opportunity to do that actually. And you're also, again, if you're an introverted person and you spend a lot of time alone and developing your own hobbies and interests and stuff like that, I'm gonna dare to say that you're likely a pretty interesting person too. You likely have plenty of interesting things that you can talk to other people about or share about yourself. So don't let other people's idea of who you are ever stop you, okay? You're doing amazing, sweetie. Okay, now back to the video. With introversion also often comes an ability to be introspective, to listen, to be somewhat self-aware. I also think to be able to, self-reflect and do critical self-examination too, because you spend so much time in your own head that I think that just is something, obviously not always, but that often introverts can be relatively skilled at. Their own internal landscape is not foreign to them. It's terrain that they're really comfortable and familiar with. Also, thinking before you speak is something that I think introverted people are quite prone to doing as well. And if you're an introverted person, you can also be very observant too. And none of these are exclusive to introverts. Like, you can be an extrovert and still be really good at all of these things. That reminds me on a conversation that I had with a friend of mine at some point about anxiety, actually, which is also something I think that sometimes introverted people, again, who are quite sensitive, can experience more. And for me, I think anxiety is also part of the reason why I don't necessarily seek out stimulation in other people as much, because I'm plenty stimulated on my own, okay? But yeah, I had a conversation with my friend about anxiety and anxious people. And she told me about this article she read, where basically the message of the article was that we need people with anxiety in society in order for society to function. We need both the people who are like, hey, let's go look at that random cage over there. Maybe it would be nice shelter. Let's go explore. Let's go see. We need the people who do that and propel us to take action and push boundaries. And then we also need the people who are like, that sounds cool, but also what if there's a saber-toothed tiger in that cave before we go in there, And that usually will be your more anxious people, your overthinkers. And we need both. We need the people who consider risk less and have less of a tendency towards anxiety in order to propel forward and push boundaries. And we need the people who are like, that's cool, but should we wait a minute in order to not die? Those people protect us from not dying, from not taking unnecessary risks. I also think that sensitive people, this is becoming kind of like a video both about being a sensitive girly, but also being an introverted person at the same time. But yeah, I think that sensitive people in society, their role, I think, is also to kind of be the canaries in the coal mines. These are the people who will start to collapse first when things begin to go wrong, when we start to develop in a direction that's unhealthy for us. I think one example is, I know where I'm from right now, there's been some discussion in the media about people being, unhappy, and there's never been so many young people in the mental health system. And obviously experts and politicians and whatnot disagree on this and have completely different theories on it, but it's an indication that something is wrong, right? It's an indication that something that we're doing in society is not working, that something is making people mentally ill. And what is that thing is then the thing that we can disagree on. My personal theory on that, I think, is performance culture and toxic work-life balance and tons of other things that are contributing to people not feeling the best. but it's something that is a warning system to everyone else. Like, this is something where if we continue down this path that's making people unwell, then more people will probably become unwell. And so I think if that's you, just remember that you serve a really important function in society for the survival of the human race, for your group of people, whatever that is. But we need everybody. We need all kinds of humans. Everyone serves a function. And your introversion is part of like an overall healthy, well-functioning human race. Not to say everything about the human race is healthy and well-functioning, right? But there's a reason that you're here. There's a reason that there are people like you. There are so many strengths that come with being an introverted person as well that, you know, you can really double down on. And, you know, instead of seeing that as your weakness, the things that come along with your introversion, that can be your strength. That can be the thing that, you know, takes you to the career that you never even knew that you wanted, or the thing that ultimately just ends up shaping your life in a way that was meant for you. I think when we try to fix the parts of our personality that we don't like or that we wish were different, I think we miss out on why that thing is there. If you were meant to be a really extroverted person, you would have, but I believe there's a reason you did not come out that way. Embrace the strengths that you have as a more introverted person. Embrace the advantages that gives you as well, because there's strengths and weaknesses to both that you can double down on. There are many famous artists out there as well who credit their success in their field to also their introversion. If you want to do some kind of art, usually to be able to do that, you have to sit with yourself for a really, really, really long time. If you can't do that, you likely will never be able to put in the hours to perfect your craft or whatever it is that you're doing. So instead of wishing that you were different or wishing that you were more extroverted, you know, if you have certain qualities that, you know, you envy about more extroverted people, those are absolutely things that you could work on in yourself if you want to. I have things that I want to work on as well. I should really get better at small talk. That I think that would be helpful to me. But at the end of the day, instead of wishing you were different, focus on what are your strengths, like what's really cool about this character trait of mine? How could I actually use this to my advantage? There's so many ways that being more introverted, that benefits you and that has potential that perhaps wouldn't be there if you were wired differently. Like, for example, when I was a child, I spend a lot of time just sitting by myself in my room drawing, and as a result of that, I'm pretty good at drawing. And I probably wouldn't have been so good at it to this day if I had not spent countless fucking hours just drawing as a kid alone in my own company. And you know, that's a nice skill to have. I think that's pretty fun. I like that I can do that. I think it's cool. I do not, at this current stage in my life anyway, wish that I was different. I am quite grateful for, I have a plant that's dying. Anyway, I am quite grateful for my introversion most of the time. There are things that I do wish I was better at, but like these are things that I can always work on. So basically, moral of the video, introversion is a gift. It's really cool. I think if you're an introverted person, count yourself lucky that you get to be one. Again, obviously it comes with both strengths and weaknesses as with everything else, but remember your gifts and be really grateful for them, and also know that there's a reason why you are the way that you are, and the human race needs all kind of people in order to survive and thrive. Thank you so much for joining me in my little corner of the internet today. I really appreciate it. And if you like this video, feel free to like it. And also, if you are a fellow sensitive introverted girly and there are any gifts to introversion or sensitivity that I missed in this video, please feel free to drop them in a comment. I would really love to read them in case that I missed out on anything. But yeah, other than that, that's the end of the video. So this is the last you'll get to see of my beautiful face for this time. Very sorry about that. But I have other videos where you can go to also look at my beautiful face. So I think that you should totally do that. They're going to be in the screen right now. So like, I'm just going to be here waiting for you to click, basically. There's going to be very uncomfortable silence between us until you click on one of them. So why are you still here?